Hi everybody, welcome to part 2 of our models of psychopathology. In this second video, we're going to be talking about psychological processes, so things like our thoughts, behaviors, and actions, and how those influence the development of psychopathology. So let's start with the basics, behaviorism. So in behaviorism, there is both classical and operant conditioning. For classical conditioning, really, I'm not going to have us do those worksheets where we figure out what the unconditioned stimulus is and the conditioned stimulus. We're just going to skip past that and talk more about the big picture. The big picture here is that we associate something that's typically neutral with an emotion. So some sort of emotional response. If we remember little Albert, we can classically condition a fear. So that white rat at first was neutral. We pair it with that loud banging, and eventually that white rat creates a fear response. So we do know that this could work for something like phobias. We could be classically conditioned to something like spiders, let's say, or elevators or escalators, right? All of those things can classically condition us. But one of the really interesting parts about this is that therapies can help us remove that association. So in our therapies, what we would do is just keep repeatedly bringing up that conditioned stimulus. So in this case, it would be the rat. We keep bringing that back up over and over again, show them, hey, this isn't something to be feared, and we break that association. So that's how classical conditioning might occur in something like a phobia. Operant conditioning, on the other hand, is where we have that positive and negative reinforcements and punishments. The key thing here is that behavior that is reinforced is going to continue. The behavior that is punished will stop. The consequences of our actions has a big impact on things. Positive and negative have nothing to do with whether or not it's a positive thing or a negative thing. Instead, positive and negative have to do with whether or not something is added or subtracted. For the purposes of this class, if something is reinforced, that behavior will continue. So, to give us an idea, if a child is asked a question, asked to participate in a class, for example, that child feels very anxious. They may avoid actually answering anything. And when that avoidance happens, they might feel uncomfortable. But if an adult rescues them and answers for them, so let's just say it's a parent, comes in and answers the question for the child, everyone feels better, right? So the child and the adult's anxiety are lowered. Everybody's feeling good. That behavior is going to keep continuing. Thus, we know it's a reinforcement. In this case, we know that it's a negative reinforcement because we're removing anxiety. And this is going to keep that behavior of that child not answering a question, it's going to keep that going. So we use things like operant conditioning a lot in things like behavioral therapy. So here's a short little clip of how we are reinforcing different behaviors and trying to get this child to start using his words a little bit more.
Oh, way to go! Yep, and you can sit on the chair. Up the top here.
Up the top.
Beautiful! Give me that hand. Here we go. Round and round the garden like a teddy bear. One step. Two step. Tickle Daniel everywhere. You are such a ticklish guy. What's that? Oh, do you see your teddy?
Yeah.
Oh, you do too. Let's get him and we can have a quick kiss. Come on, Teddy. Kiss. Okay, what we're going to do with Teddy now, let's put him up here so he can watch, because it's time to play the popcorn game. Okay, but uh-oh, we don't have all the pieces. So I need you to tell me what we need to get so we can play. Nice sitting, Daniel. Very good. What do we need to get?
The lid.
What's that?
Lid.
Get the lid. Okay. I like your sitting. Here we go.
The big lid.
Oh, the big lid. Silly me. Of course. Here's the big lid. Great thinking, Daniel.
So just so you know, we'll be talking a lot more about behavioral therapy as we go along, because it is something that we use very often in childhood therapy. Another thing that we need to focus here on is cognition. So how do our thoughts actually influence our behaviors? And we often use something called cognitive behavioral therapy, and that's really how our thoughts and behaviors and actions all interact together. And so how we think influences how we act and how we feel. So let's think about this in Valerie's case. How do her thoughts potentially influence how she's feeling and acting? Well, if I were Valerie and I had a really hard time early on in school, I may have this thought that I'm a troublemaker, right? I may have this feeling of discomfort every time that I have to do something academically. So this may influence my behaviors where I might want to withdraw. And so that, she becomes the Oxy and Roxy girl because she's just sitting there and not doing anything, but it makes her feel good. And it makes her feel better. So those behaviors then are going to also influence how she feels about herself or how she feels about school, and the thoughts that she has about school. So one of the things we might want to do in a case like Valerie's case is changing either those thoughts or behaviors. What might happen, right? We might do an experiment. What might happen if you actually didn't use Oxy or Roxy when you're in class? How can we change how you're thinking about, I'm a failure in school? And how might that actually change your behaviors? Another thing that's really important is this idea about social cognition. How do we actually think about what other people are thinking about, right? How do we think about the social world? This will be an important aspect of things when it comes to things like our oppositional defiant disorder and such in this little graphic. So are you making fun of me? That might be actually something that we call a hostile attribution bias. We assume that that person is being hostile against him, even though that action might not actually make any difference, right? He may just be counting down the days that he's been in jail, let's say. So interpreting those actions as being hostile. And you can get those interpretations through past experiences or through your family. I'm not sure whether or not Valerie has a hostile attribution bias. It doesn't really seem like it. But this is something that is often quite common in children who have oppositional defiant disorder or conduct disorder. Something we also know is that children come into this world with their own little personality. And those inborn characteristics is called temperament. And we think that this has to do with our biology, right? We come into the world, we may feel certain things a little bit more than others. We can think about this in different dimensions, such as whether or not we are easy or a difficult baby or slow to warm up. This may interact with our environment too, right? So some babies are already born with a lot more negativity, like this baby on the left. Might be a little bit more of a easier time crying or a harder time like regulating their own emotions and feeling good about themselves. Whereas this baby might be pretty calm. This is going to influence everything, right? If you think about that baby that's a little bit more negative might be having a hard time actually regulating and feeling good. And that might influence also how the parents interact. So there's this concept called goodness of fit. how well does that environment actually match what the baby needs? So for a baby that's a little bit more negative or might have a harder time with those negative emotions, you may actually want a parent to be more patient and to take care of that child in a different way. And so that their negative emotions might be changed over time, and they may have a easier time and be less neurotic as an adult. And this all comes down to emotion regulation. So emotion regulation is really our ability to change and influence our own emotions. So this is something that at first we really rely on our parents for. When I'm crying and distressed, I want my parents to come help me so that I can feel better. And then eventually I'm going to self-regulate. So a child like Valerie may have a harder time regulating those negative emotions. She may feel like, I want to avoid those emotions. And the way that makes me feel better is by using drugs or alcohol. This is also really important when we consider things like our social experiences. So many disorders, we have difficulties with emotion regulation, and that might influence how well we're able to get along with others. So in a child who has autism, they may have a little bit of a harder time regulating this. So something that we often do with children with autism is like show them visual pictures to help them kind of think through this. So a child might ask, what zone am I in? I'm in the rest area. I'm doing okay. Maybe I'm getting a little bit more frustrated, or maybe I should stop. And so how can I learn that, okay, I'm ready to learn. Maybe I'm actually getting a little bit more frustrated. And if I'm angry and hitting somebody, I have to stop. And so there are ways that we can get into a green zone. So how can I regulate those emotions to make myself feel a little bit better so I can participate in class, for example? So all of this was a good overview of our psychology, our cognitions, our thoughts and behaviors, how they all influence each other, and how that might actually relate to psychological disorders. Next, we'll be talking about the family in our next video.